This is one of those creepy posters that I read, and it just gives me the willies. This is a horror story by a user from Reddit. It's about something called the vanishing hitchhiker, where a hitchhiker gets in your car, disappears, and then reappears in the back seat. And this one is particularly creepy because there's more than one hitchhiker. So let's read it. The old adage goes, if you pick up a hitchhiker, you should never let them in your car. But what do you do when you have no choice? About 10 years ago, I was working as a paramedic in a fairly small town. Our shifts were always busy, and we were often exhausted after our 24-hour shifts. The small town meant that it didn't take much for us to be sent home early if things were too hectic. My partner and I were doing just that. We were heading home at about 11 p.m. after our shift had ended at 7 a.m. I was driving, and my partner was in the passenger seat trying to catch up on some sleep. Suddenly, my partner jolted upright and asked me to pull over. They had just remembered that they had to drop something off at a friend's house that we had been visiting earlier in the evening. It was a pretty big favor, and I knew that they would feel really bad if they didn't go back and get it. There was nothing else going on at the moment, so I agreed. It was probably only 2 minutes down the road that we came across someone hitching a ride. My partner looked at me and raised their eyebrows, asking if I wanted to stop. I shook my head and continued driving. About 5 seconds later, another person stuck out their thumb. Now, normally, I wouldn't think twice about stopping, but I could tell that my partner needed this break, and I wasn't about to risk losing it. I kept driving. For the next few seconds, I could see two people standing on the side of the road, arms stretched out like they were holding something. I told my partner to keep their eyes closed until we passed them. I couldn't bring myself to look, but I heard my partner suck in a breath as we drove past. As they opened their eyes, they tried to explain that I hadn't actually seen anything and that they probably imagined it. I refused to meet their gaze and continued driving. I had definitely seen them. Whatever they were holding looked large and was dark. I couldn't make out any details. All I knew was that I didn't want to look. After about 30 seconds, we heard a knock on the window and both of us screamed. As I slammed on the brakes, I turned to my partner, who was pale and shaken. It was still dark outside, and the streetlights did little to illuminate the inside of the car. My partner and I started yelling at each other, telling the other person to run away. But there was no reply. One of us suggested rolling the window down a crack to see if we could hear anything, but neither of us could bring ourselves to do it. After what felt like an eternity, the knocking stopped and we were left in tense silence. We decided to drive the rest of the way to our friend S house with the doors locked and the windows wound up tight. When we got there, we threw the doors open and ran out of the car to get inside. My partner and I checked everywhere inside the house, but thankfully found no one. We told our friend what had happened and they let us stay until the sun came up. The whole time we kept expecting to hear screams or see shadows darting around the room. However, nothing ever happened. When the sun finally began to rise, we got in the car and drove home. We were both shaken and quiet until we got home. Once I had locked my front door, I went to my window to check outside. My neighbor had a long, narrow driveway that angled onto our street, and from my window, I could see down its lane. What I saw made me scream and collapse into a heap on the floor. Standing in my driveway were the two hitchhikers from last night. They were no longer dressed in the same clothes as the night before, but they were still holding the same thing. It was a large, dark shape, and they appeared to be arguing about it. Each time they seemed to come to a stalemate. One of them would raise the object higher above their head. It looked like a coffin. As the minutes ticked by, they kept looking in the direction of my house and exchanging uneasy glances. Eventually, one of them climbed into the back seat of my car. I watched in disbelief as the other stood by the open door for a few seconds before climbing in as well. They huddled together in the back seat, and I could hear them talking. I don't know what they said, but their voices sounded strange, raspy, and hollow. They sat in the back seat for about half an hour before they started making strange motions towards the front seat. They began tapping on the middle seat as if beckoning someone to join them. I was frozen in fear, Not knowing what to do, one of them began banging on the seat impatiently, and I could hear muffled thumping sounds coming from the back seat. That's when I realized they weren't in the back seat. They were sitting in the middle of the front row. I must have been looking down when they got in. I must have stood there for a while, frozen in terror, because eventually they stopped banging on the seats and started pounding on the glass. As the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, the thumping from the back seat grew louder. Then I heard a scratching sound. The tapping became more frantic and a new voice joined in, speaking urgently. The voice was male, but it sounded distorted, like it was coming from behind a wall. Then I saw something that sent shivers down my spine. The driver's side window started fogging up. I stared in disbelief as the image of a hand slowly formed on the glass. It was a skeletal hand, bony fingers reaching towards me with fingernails that looked like curved hooks. The sight of it made me scramble backwards, tripping over my own feet. The scratching intensified, and the distorted voice started to scream. "Let me out! Let me out!" The tapping became violent, hammering on the glass. The two figures in the front seat swayed back and forth, and the smell of decay filled my nostrils. I stumbled backwards, knocking over a chair, and the tapping abruptly stopped. I peeked through the curtains, but I couldn't see anything. Maybe it was all a dream, just a vivid figment of my sleep-deprived imagination. Was it a trick of the light? A hallucination brought on by fatigue, or something more sinister? Now, years have passed, but the memory of that day still lingers. A chilling reminder of the unsettling mysteries that sometimes lurk in the shadows. Every time I close my eyes, I see that skeletal hand reaching towards me, its icy touch sending a jolt of fear through my bones. The distorted voice echoes in my nightmares, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lies just beyond our perception. And then there's the question that keeps me up at night. What would you do if you found yourself in that situation? Would you have the courage to confront the unknown, or would you succumb to the paralyzing fear gripping me tightly? The answer remains elusive, hidden in the recesses of my mind. Perhaps the true horror lies not in the ghostly hitchhikers, but in the depths of our own fear. Yeah, that's messed up. I wonder if it's related to the vanishing hitchhiker trope, because it seems like a lot of stories follow a similar structure, right? You get a hitchhiker in your car, they disappear, and then they show up in the back seat. It's like they have a transporter or something. So if you picked up two hitchhikers in your car and then they disappeared, where do you think they would show up? If you're thinking, oh, the back seat, you are wrong, because in many versions of the vanishing hitchhiker story, they end up in the front seat. And if you thought, oh, maybe they'd be in the trunk, you're also wrong, because in many versions of the vanishing hitchhiker story, they end up there too. And if you thought, well, gee, it's a mystery, why not just look everywhere? You are also wrong, because in many versions of the vanishing hitchhiker story, it turns out they are everywhere and nowhere at the same time, like they're not actually in the car at all. And some versions are even weirder than that. Like in this version, the main character realizes that the hitchhiker is a ghost who's hitched a ride to heaven. Or how about this one, where the hitchhiker isn't actually a person at all, but the devil himself? And hey, if you like this story, why not check out my podcast, where I publish new episodes every week. Also, leave a like and a comment if you want to support the channel. And hey, here's another story you can listen to if you want.